Frank Grace, and I'm doing a presentation today about Afghanistan. The title of my presentation is Moral Warfare in Southwest Asia, Why Regional Coordination is the Key to a Sustainable Victory in Afghanistan. This project had its genesis back in the fall. I attended a conference in Washington, D.C. It's called Counterinsurgency Leadership in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it just so happened I went to the conference about a week after General McChrystal's so-called secret report to President Obama leaked. And so obviously the big topic of discussion at the conference was not really Iraq. It was a lot more about Afghanistan. There were a lot of prominent speakers there, including Bing West, Bob Kaplan, Tom Ricks, and the keynote speaker was General Petraeus himself. I came away from that conference, I got to tell you, a lot more pessimistic about our endeavor in Afghanistan than I had ever been at any point prior to that. Of course, that led me to do research across fall semester, led me to turn in a paper in December on the topic of counterinsurgency in Afghanistan. Knowing that I wanted to do a presentation at the symposium, I've kept up with developments that have happened since then, and I have to say, I am not necessarily less pessimistic today than I was back then. And as I allude to in my title, I think that the big thing is regional coordination. I think we tend to look at this as a very Afghan-centric issue. But if you read a lot of the literature, especially if you read things by Ahmed Rashid, he's a Pakistani journalist who just wrote a great book called Descent into Chaos, you really get the sense this is really a regional issue. This is a Central Asian issue. And so what I really want to talk about is the role that's being played in Afghanistan, for better or worse, by some of the regional powers, and particularly Pakistan, India, and China, who I think Pakistan probably plays too great of a role in Afghanistan right now. And I think India and China are not playing enough of a role, and I think that there are indications, and I'm going to show you some slides towards the end of the presentation, that show that they probably would like to, but that maybe the United States needs to play the role of coordinating the effort a little bit more. Center for New American Security just this past week released a report. They said one of the #1 issues facing Afghanistan is economic development. The unemployed young men, they don't have much of an education system. They don't have any sort of vocational training or anything, and those unemployed young men often turn either to the Taliban or to growing and selling opium. And so we have got to provide, if we're going to tamp down the insurgency, we've got to provide some kind of economic growth for Afghanistan. The report says that the #1 barrier to economic growth is a lack of coordination, both within our own government, between the government and the private sector, between different government agencies, and between different nations that might like to invest and might like to help out. Now for some bad news, here's a map of Afghanistan in 2007. The dark red areas are areas that are considered to have a high presence of Taliban. The high presence of Taliban is determined by having one or more attack per week from Taliban forces on international security forces or civilians within the area. Now this was 2007, 54% of the country is bad enough. But here's 2008. And here is August of 2009, right about the time I was going to the conference in D.C. As you can see, this is a problem that could possibly be getting worse. At least it looks to be getting worse if we judge it by number of attacks by the Taliban in a given region. U.S. casualties in Afghanistan have been moving basically the same way as that map on Taliban infiltration would indicate. As you can see, this line is going straight up from about 2005 on. You know, when President Obama said that in July of 2011 he wants to start drawing down troops, I think what he was really saying is this line is going to go down. And it's going to go down by hook or by crook. It'll either go down because there's been success and they've tamped down the violence, or it'll go down because America starts pulling our forces back and eventually pulling out. And that's what really concerns me, because if we pull out without having some regional coordination, we're just going to put Afghanistan right back into chaos like it was across the mid-1990s, which is how we got to the Taliban taking over, Al-Qaeda taking over with the Taliban, and 9/11. Here's one of our big problems. As you can notice, the kind of yellowish tan country here is Afghanistan. The white country is Pakistan. You'll notice all of the major groups that are active in Afghanistan are based inside Pakistan. And I'm going to talk about Pakistan in about 2 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the relationship between some of these groups and some of the Pakistani security forces. Obviously, this creates a problem because we're not, strictly speaking, supposed to cross over the border, although in recent years the United States has put a lot of drone strikes right along that border region. Bing West is one of my favorite writers on this topic. He describes the problem with Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a nation of valleys. Most people live in a valley, but every valley has a mountain. And the mountains are owned by the Taliban right now. The U.S. just doesn't have forces that can go up into the mountains and chase the Taliban. So America will roll into a valley, and we just saw this with the, Korgel Valley this week. The U.S. forces pulled out. And the problem is, the Taliban didn't leave, really. They just went up to higher elevations where the U.S. didn't see them and waited. Population security is a 24-hour-a-day job. That's what we're trying to protect the population. And, you know, Elliot Cohen is a professor at Johns Hopkins University of International Relations. He worked for the Bush administration in the State Department, coordinating Afghan and Iraqi policy. And, you know, he says that the favorite technique of the Taliban, or of any insurgents, even if you go back to Vietnam, is usually to leave a letter on the door at night. And they'll sneak into a village, and the letter will just say, hey, we're the Taliban, we're looking out for you. Or it might say, hey, we noticed you were talking to some American soldiers today, or hey, we noticed you took an MRE from that Marine. We're watching. Don't step out of line. And if you don't have security 24 hours a day, it's really impossible to stop that kind of thing from happening. That kind of thing gets into a person's mind, and it makes the people a lot less likely to assist the American forces. It makes them a lot more likely to provide some kind of assistance to the Taliban, either the assistance of sort of a crime of omission, they just won't tell anybody where they are, or even giving food or other types of aid and comfort to the Taliban. The Field Manual 24, which is the Army manual on coin, says there have to be 23 peacekeepers for every 1,000 civilians in a country. Now, I know I'm a political science major, but I'm going to do a math problem real quick. That's okay. Okay, you got 23 million Afghan civilians, divide that by 1,000, it's 23,000. 23,000 times 23 is 529,000. That would be, according to Field Manual 24, the number of forces we need to be able to secure Afghanistan. Now, nothing says they all have to be American, of course, and the U.S. is doing its part to try to train up the Afghan military. There was a story in Military Review Journal this past autumn that looked at training the Afghan forces. And basically, because of desertion and because of casualty rates, it's going to be very difficult to ever get the Afghan army maximum to over 100,000. Right now, it stands at about 50,000. Now, there are also some police and some NATO forces, but we're nowhere near the 529,000 that FM24 would suggest we should have. Again, this is why I say we really need to be looking for some regional partners who are also interested in stabilizing Afghanistan. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit. Here is what Afghans think. This is a poll conducted by ABC News and the BBC. This is what Afghanistan thinks about different countries. Generally speaking, the blue is good, the blue means positive, the red is negative, and the gray is neutral. So you can see India actually ranks very high. Germany, Iran, the United States. You can see the U.S. is hanging in there about 50% positive. Opinion of the role play, you can see the United States is either positive or neutral right now, which actually, since this was taken in 2009, is a positive sign. It means we haven't completely lost the Afghan people yet. You can also see India, though, right behind the United States. And it's interesting, you know, the UK is way down there, even though they're one of our partners. France isn't even really on the list, even though they're one of our partners. But India is. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, too. You also notice, real quick, let's go back to that. Pakistan is on the bottom on both lists. And right now,